One of the common refrains from the likes of Elon Musk and that ilk of individual over the past few months has been, you don't hate the mainstream media enough. And guys, that's true. The mainstream media is not only worthless and slimy and a substitute for actual thought, the mainstream media is actively working to lie to you in order to get their own way. And by their own way, I mean the way of one particular um, political party in the United States. If, listen, I don't consider myself a Republican. I really don't. I consider myself independently minded. I think that many people who are finding themselves haplessly on this side of things do consider themselves to be independently minded. But the reason that I am getting into this argument today, the reason that I am bringing this up is we have a stupendous opportunity before us. Two presidents, one adored by the media, Joe Biden, one not so much, President Trump, were both president on the same day. They both did a little bit of the same thing. And we have these things, this same thing painted very differently by the same news source, different reporters, but the same news source. First off, let's just talk about what happened. Joe Biden issued pardons prior to Trump taking office that were sweeping, long-standing, and for, guys, anything that anyone ever could notice. That doesn't sound suspicious at all. Oh, yeah, by the way, they were his family members. So if anyone were funneling money to the big guy, say 10% or so, those people would likely be the people. The other one, Donald Trump, pardoned people who were put in prison, many of whom never had a trial. Just arrested and put in prison. Okay, great. Not his family, not anyone with whom he had ever done business, people he had never met. He pardoned them. How do you think the media covered each of these circumstances? Well, we're going to get into it. In an article titled "Trump Grants Sweeping Clemency to All January 6th Rioters." Now, here, I have to get this out of my mind first. 2020, when your neighborhood was on fire, they did not care. When your neighborhood had cars burning, they did not care. In the years and months after those riots, when people were still, loosey-goosey on the law, and cars were being ripped off left and right in your city, they did not care. But by God, when a few people, comparative to the nationwide riots, when a few people get rowdy in their neighborhood, boy, it's straight to prison. Anyway, Trump grants a sweeping clemency to all January 6th rioters, the extraordinary pardons and commutations extended to those who committed both violent and nonviolent crimes on January 6th, including assaulting police officers and seditious conspiracy, from the New York Times by Alan Fuhrer? President Donald J. Trump, in one of his first official acts, issued a sweeping grant clemency on Monday to all of the nearly 1,600 people charged in connection with the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. An attack suggests coordination. You think that these 1,600 people were coordinated and decided, without any weapons, we're going to take over the United States? Okay. If you believe that, I have some land to sell you. Issuing pardons to most of the defendants and commuting the sentences of 14 members of the Proud Boys Oath Keepers militia. most of whom were convicted of seditious conspiracy. Now, look, I don't know a whole lot about the Proud Boys. I don't know a whole lot about Oath Keepers militias. The reason I don't know a whole lot about them seems to be there's not a whole lot going on. You hear about Hamas doing things. You hear about ISIS doing things. Aside from being the counter side of some protests and riots, I don't know anything the Proud Boys have ever done. Maybe I'm wrong. But I'm just throwing it out. I have no idea. But groups that are real problems, a lot of those groups I know about. Mr. Trump's moves amounted to an extraordinary reversal for rioters accused of both low-level nonviolent offenses and for those who had assaulted police officers. Okay, so here's a strange admission that we get here. These people were in prison. Reversal for rioters accused of low-level nonviolent offenses. In prison since 2021. Okay, you want to keep making the case that this is the bad guy, whatever you want. As they effectively erased years of efforts by federal investigators to seek out accountability for the mob assault on the peaceful transfer of presidential power after Mr. Trump's loss in the 2020 election. As part of this pardon, Mr. Trump also directed the Justice Department to dismiss all pending indictments that remained against people facing charges for January 6th. This is just a slimy paragraph. Sitting in the Oval Office, Mr. Trump said he hoped that many of the defendants could be released from prison as early as tonight. They've already been in jail a long time, he said. These people have been destroyed. Does anyone argue that that's false? That they have been in jail for a long time? That their lives have been destroyed? You go to jail for 3 years and tell me how your job welcomes you back. The pardons Mr. Trump issued, full, complete, and unconditional, he wrote, will touch the lives of about 1,000 defendants accused of misdemeanors like disorderly conduct, breaching the Capitol's restricted grounds, and trespassing at the building. Do any of these things at your local Target and see if you get thrown in jail for 3 years. So when it's your neighborhood, they don't care. When it's their neighborhood, straight to prison. Many of the rioters have served only days, weeks, or months in prison, if any time at all. Many haven't. Many have served a long time. The pardons will also wipe the slate clean for violent offenders who went after the police on January 6th with baseball bats, 2x4s, and bear spray, and are serving prison terms, in some cases, of more than a decade. What happened when these things were brought to your neighborhood? Moreover, Mr. Trump pardoned Enrique Tarrio, the former leader of the Proud Boys, who was serving a 22-year prison term after being convicted at trial of seditious conspiracy, a crime that requires prosecutors to prove that a defendant used violent force against the government. Now, this is thrown in here, requires prosecutors to prove that a defendant used violent force in order that you don't question it. What does it mean to prove something? And here's the thing. Again, I don't know a lot about the Proud Boys. I don't know a lot about Enrique Tarrio. One of the things that I know they say about the Proud Boys is that it's a white nationalist, white supremacist organization. Now, I don't know. I've never been to a meeting. I've never stood in line with them. What I will say is I have seen Enrique Tarrio on a couple of podcasts, and he would be the darkest complected white supremacist I've ever noticed. Maybe I'm racist for noticing that. But it makes me question the mainstream media narrative. A representative from Mr. Tarrio said he had been released from a federal prison in Louisiana and was expected to return to Miami, his hometown, by Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Trump's actions drew an immediate firestorm of criticism, not the least from some of the investigators who had worked on the January 6th cases. Now, here's one note to remember moving forward in this video. You have ended this with a guy who apparently committed seditious conspiracy. Okay, I'm willing to take their word for that. I'm willing to accept Enrique Tarrio committed seditious conspiracy. Okay? I don't know what that means. I don't know that there was necessarily violence in connection with this because it does not say that. So we'll say just seditious conspiracy. He had planned to overthrow the government. There's a lot of people that plan a lot of things, okay? Not making an excuse for it if that's what was the case. Absolutely idiotic. You weren't going to pull it off, pal. But notice where this article ends. Donald Trump pardoned a guy guilty of seditious conspiracy. And it was the worst thing in the history of the world, and everybody was criticizing him for it. Just remember that. Seditious conspiracy, everyone was criticizing him. In an article titled Biden Pardons 5 Members of His Family in Final Minutes in Office, subtitled Mr. Biden emphasized that he did not believe his family did anything wrong, but he feared political attacks by Donald J. Trump from the New York Times, same paper, by Michael D. Shear. The article reads as such. President Biden pardoned 5 members of his family in his last minutes in office, saying in a statement that he did so not because they did anything wrong. Then why would you need to pardon them, you tool? But because he feared political attacks from incoming President Donald J. Trump. If he was going to attack them, he'd have to prove something, wouldn't he? Wouldn't he? You can't just declare someone guilty. You can conspire someone guilty. But I don't think that end of things, the Donald Trump end of things, is as much into conspiracy as is the left side of things. My family has been subjected to unrelenting attacks and threats motivated solely by desire to hurt me. Really? Because it seems like if they wanted to hurt you, they'd just ask you to go up a flight of steps. They'd put some ice cream at the top of the stairs. You'd do the hurting yourself. The worst kind of partisan politics. The worst kind of partisan politics, like what you have done for the past 4 years, going after not just political enemies, but anyone you didn't like. Ask Elon Musk how difficult the last 4 years have been because of a turd like Joe Biden in the White House. Unfortunately, I have no reason to believe these attacks will end. Mr. Biden's action pardoned James B. Biden, his brother, Sarah Jones Biden, James' wife, Valerie Biden Owens, Mr. Biden's sister, John T. Owens, Mr. Owens' husband, and Francis W. Biden, Mr. Biden's brother. That's a lot of people. That is an awful lot of people to just kind of need to pardon. But here's another thing. It's not everybody. James Biden is his brother, Sarah Biden, and is James's wife. Valerie Biden Owens, Mr. Biden's sister, James T. Owens, Mr. Biden's husband, or Mrs. Owens' husband, and Francis W. Biden, Mr. Biden's brother. Now, your wife isn't on that list, Joe. Why wouldn't your wife be on that list, Joe? Your daughter's not on that list, Joe. Why wouldn't she be on that list? Joe? Do you not do business with women? Do you not care if Donald Trump goes after your wife? The White House announced the pardons with less than 20 minutes left in Mr. Biden's presidency after he had already walked into the Capitol Rotunda to witness the swearing in of Mr. Trump before leaving the Capitol for the last time as president. The pardons were a remarkable coda to Mr. Biden's 50-year political career, underscoring the mistrust and anger that the president feels about Mr. Trump, the man who preceded and will succeed him in office. So again, this is Trump's fault. This must be Trump's fault. We have to find a way to blame this on Trump. Mr. Biden had repeatedly warned that Mr. Trump was a threat to democracy in America. The same type of threat to democracy that would pardon his own family members preemptively, before anything had been proven or even investigated. But he also said that he believed in the rule of law and was confident in the stability and institutions of law enforcement. The pardons, like the one he did earlier for his son Hunter Biden, threatened to challenge that assertion. No, sir. Michael D. Shear, it absolutely obliterates anything that this clown says about law, order, or justice. In his statement, Mr. Biden explained his action. I believe in the rule of law. I was optimistic that the strength of our legal institutions will ultimately prevail over politics, Mr. Biden wrote. But baseless and politically motivated investigations wreak havoc on the lives and safeties and financial security of targeted individuals and their families, even when the individuals have done nothing wrong and will ultimately be exonerated. The mere fact of being investigated or prosecuted can irreparably damage their reputations and finances. That's odd. You know what else can irreparably damage someone's reputation? Being pardoned. Being pardoned when no crime was even suggested yet. Joe Biden, you fool. Mr. Biden, remember what we talked about. The last that I had from the previous article was that Donald Trump had pardoned a guy found guilty of seditious conspiracy and had pardoned a bunch of people, some of whom did nothing violent, but there was criticism from all around. Mr. Biden also commuted the life sentence for Leonard Peltier, a Native American activist who was convicted of killing 2 FBI agents in 1975 on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Mr. Biden said that his action would allow Mr. Peltier, who is 80 years old, to serve the remainder of his life, of his time in home confinement. In his statement, White House officials noted tribal nations, Nobel Peace Laureates, former law enforcement officials, including the former U.S. attorney whose office oversaw Mr. Peltier's prosecution and appeal. Dozens of lawmakers and human rights organizations strongly support granting Mr. Peltier's clemency, citing the advanced age, illness, his close ties to leadership in the Native American community, and substantial length of time he had already spent in prison. Here's the thing. All of these people, Nobel Peace Laureates, former law enforcement officers, dozens of lawmakers, human rights organizations, I don't care what any of them say. Why should I? How many people, if you go down the street and ask them, how many people, man to man, would tell you they support the pardoning of January 6th protesters or rioters or seditious conspiracists? They're not going to put your name in their article, but if you have a title like Nobel Peace Laureate, they will. If you have a title like dozens of lawmakers, they will. If you have a title like human rights organizations, what does that even mean? What human rights organizations? What rights have they fought for? What have they done? This is how the mainstream media just pads things. This is how the mainstream media just collects words, puts them down, and tries to bolster up whatever half-witted argument they're trying to make at the time. How someone can look and Mr. Peltier here, killing a couple FBI officers is bad. Some of the things that he pardoned Joe Biden towards the end of his 4 years of as president there, go ahead and look into them. I don't want to talk about them. I don't want to bring them up. Some of the things that he has pardoned or commuted, absolutely disgraceful. And the act of pardoning them, possibly worse than the crime. Because what you're doing is you're putting that person back out there to do those things to other people. Now, I hate to make inflammatory comments like that. This action, non-violent, is possibly worse than the violent action. I hate making those qualifying statements. But when what you're doing is returning the ability of that violence to occur, guys, I think it might be. That work was already done. Those people were already taken off the street. The things that they had done were being served out. But you don't hate mainstream media enough. You don't. These two articles and their tones about something so selfish as what Joe Biden... Look, I'm not even getting into the Fauci pardon. I'm not even getting into the Liz Cheney pardon. I'm just talking about his family. And if, golly, man, I have to believe that if I were all that concerned about my political enemies coming after me and my loved ones and I'd probably go ahead and issue a pardon to the woman that I'm sharing a bed with. Wouldn't you? Anyway, guys, that's all I have for this video. If you like this sort of thing, hit the like button. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting that subscribe button to stick around for more stuff in the future. I'm trying to get into more and more uploads on this channel. And I'm not going to be completely political all the time. I really don't want to be political all the time. I want to talk about all sorts of stuff. I want to talk about philosophy. I want to talk about nonfiction books. I want to talk about movies. I want to talk about all sorts of stuff. But right now, there's no getting around this in my estimation.